Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Probably Cancelled podcast in association with the Midwestern Marx Institute. My name is Bridget, and I am your host. And today I am back again with friend of the pod, John Potash. He's an author, a documentarian, and is known for his books, including Drugs as Weapons Against Us, as well as the FBI's War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders. He's been on the podcast a few times in the past to talk about his work exposing the US government's involvement with COINTELPRO, as well as their dabbling in biological warfare by pushing drugs on various segments of the population. And today he is back to talk about his newest documentary titled CIA Drugs Are Us, which is a sequel to his previous documentary, Drugs as Weapons Against Us. So I'm super happy to have you back, John. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on again, Bridget.
Good, yeah. Always happy to have you. I watched your most recent documentary and it was super, super great. You added on a lot of new information that hadn't been previously explored before in your previous works, all about government influence and how they're really messing us up with these drugs. So I'm excited to have you go even deeper into this subject during this interview today. So just to start, because some of my listeners have heard your previous episodes that you were on, which I'll link in the show notes so people can find those easily. But for those who are new and new to your work, can you just explain like an overview of your research and what you've dedicated your life to doing?
Sure. So, my day job is as a psychotherapist, and I started out in 1989 in Baltimore City after getting a psychology degree. Started out in addictions counseling. I further did addictions counseling over the next, say, 10 years in Washington, D.C. and New York City. And then started after graduate school in New York. I started transitioning more to mental health counseling along with addictions counseling. And for the last 10 years, I've been more of a trauma therapist, most exclusively in the last 5 years as a trauma therapist using EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And along the way, from around 1990 onwards, I was researching the subject of this book, Drugs as Weapons Against Us, the CIA War on Musicians and Activists. And I only took a tangent from that to first publish the book, The FBI War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders, and made a film on that. And then published Drugs as Weapons Against Us, then made a film on that in 2019. I published the book in 2015, the film in 2019, and took a tangent from that to because of the pandemic situation. I put out the film Shots Eugenics to Pandemics, and then came back to the original subject of while I was filming that. I actually had originally been working on the sequel, CIA Drugs Are Us. And so I finished the sequel after that, and after the first film that I came out with in 2019, I came to find Tom O'Neill, a author, award-winning author, had published a book on the Manson family, and found that the CIA basically used Project Chaos and MKUltra to create Manson and his family. And I show all the evidence of that. I have him talking in the film and showing the evidence of that in the film, of how he had basically found the letters that went back and forth between the CIA director, CIA Project MKUltra director, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, and the Dr. Louis Jolyon West, who was in the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic at an office there while Manson and his family were visiting there regularly. And he was giving them, according to a CIA whistleblower, he was giving them LSD regularly, and using what he professed in his own documents to be hypnosis and drugs to gain control of their minds, to turn these young runaway women, as young as 13, sadly enough, into mind controlled, like assassins, which is what they end up doing, is committing murder. So this was, a CIA project, and that's a large part of the film, in the middle of the film. And I show how that was used also against the Black Panthers, because originally these murders were to try to frame the Black Panthers, because the murders took place in a key part of Hollywood, at a woman named Sharon Tate's house, who was a top actress at the time, Roman Polanski's wife. She also was an activist organizer and had loads of top actors meeting at her house, like Donald Sutherland, Jane Fonda, and many others who called themselves the White Panthers in their solidarity with the Black Panthers, in support of the Black Panthers. They also were very anti-war and were doing some great anti-war activism there. And so the murders at that house was to scare away that all these actors from that continued activism, as well as killing the one of the top activists, actor organizers, Sharon Tate, along with others in the house at the time. And so this was, a major new finding that I had to put on film. I review the first film a bit in the first part of CIA Drugs Are Us, because I wanted to put in a little more of a comic light also, and I wanted to show the new evidence I found about the murder of John Lennon, the manipulation of John Lennon, and his murder, along with the manipulation of Kurt Cobain, and what I found was his murder. And so that's rounds out the kind of encapsulation of the original film. But then the last third of this film, I basically had uncovered the fact that the subject of the Keepers, award-winning Emmy award nominated, documentary series on Netflix. Actually, he worked. I mean, he worked and lived in a neighborhood adjacent to mine, literally within 5 miles of me. And Gemma Hoskins, the star of the Keepers, lives in my neighborhood, and so I basically just sent her information about why I believed that what this was all about was connection to CI's MKULTRA program, and sent her a bunch of documents and papers. And so she re-interviewed a lot of the victims that were in the Keepers, and for a podcast she had, and found that they were saying that, yes, we think we were programmed. We thought Joseph Maskell hypnotized us. He gave us drugs, and we were worried that might have killed someone. One woman said. Other women said that they felt like they'd never touched a gun before, and all of a sudden they were marksmen and shooting, and presented a lot of other evidence that they, in fact, were possibly hypnotized, and when the drugs were used on them, along with the trauma, they were created into dissociative kind of assets for the CIA. And so I personally also counsel someone who was a victim of Father Joseph Maskell, and have counseled others who have been victims of this church sex abuse scandal. So I just have some inside knowledge on some of this stuff, and some expertise knowledge on dissociation and dissociative identity disorder, or dissociative disorder. And for those who don't know, dissociative identity disorder is the new kind of a name for what used to be called multiple personality disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And so trauma can itself split the mind and cause split personality, but that kind of trauma plus hypnosis and drugs can cause someone to be controlled in that way.
It's so crazy, and I want to get more into the Keepers related stuff later.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But going back to the subject of the 1960s, it's so interesting because I always, growing up, my parents listened to the music that came out of the 60s, some really amazing music, and I like a lot of it. I love the fashion. I always thought, like, what a crazy time. Like, what a crazy time, and how was it possible that that even came out of nowhere and
Mm-hmm.
happened? I always looked at it like that. Like, what an anomaly, bizarre, like fantastical time. And then in my 20s, when I realized when I learned about how the CIA had basically created that subculture and kind of pushed it onto the masses and pushed drugs onto the masses, especially the youth, particularly
Hmm.
the politically aware youth
Hmm.
during the Vietnam War. I was like, oh shit, that's how something that fantastical and crazy can come about, is because it was largely socially engineered.
Right.
And when I bring this up to people on the left, they have a huge resistance towards this area of study. You know,
Hmm.
your particular expertise, there's a huge pushback because people are like, no, these drugs, they take the drugs really personally, and like the personal experiences they've had through psychedelics and um, just something that appears to be organic. I think a lot of people cannot fathom how much of our culture is inorganic and is socially engineered. So,
Yeah.
could you talk a little bit about
Sure.
the amount of experimentation that was going on, particularly in that era, and
Sure.
why? Like, why did that? Why
Sure.
were they pushing this on us at that time?
Right. So so my film and the previous film, the prequel, where a bet was the majority was about Operation MK Ultra. Now, the oligarchs and drugs started way back when, with the wealthiest families being involved with the British East India Company, the British company involved in in opium trading, and
Mhm.
I tell in the beginning of the film how they founded the Ivy League colleges with their opium fortunes, and then you bring it up to the current times, like after World War II, and they brought in from World War II, they brought in these German scientists to help out with MK Ultra,
Mhm.
and in 1953 they brought a bunch of projects that they were working on. Some of them brought in from the experiments on Jewish and other gypsy and gay and all victims and communist victims of the Nazi experiments. These Nazi scientists had these different experiments going on under the CIA umbrella, and they brought them all together in this MK Ultra in 1953, and MK Ultra had 150 through about 149 actually sub projects, and so these were they were using that these sub projects, and they were funding colleges and hospitals and prisons around the country through a group called the Human Ecology Fund. And I showed an Anthropology Today article about that, how the Human Ecology Fund was this front company channeling this CIA money through from MK Ultra into all these groups. And when government funding was cut at any point, the Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, and all of them would step in. The Carnegies would step in and provide funds. But so this money going to these colleges went to Harvard, Stanford, Johns Hopkins, Columbia, etc. And one of the most famous professors involved in that was Timothy Leary, who was the biggest pusher of acid. And Timothy Leary, in an interview later in life, admitted that he knew he was working for the CIA since 1962. And so this MK Ultra was trying, in their own documents, say they were using drugs for unconventional warfare. And we think of that as warfare overseas with soldiers and all that. But what I found is that the best evidence shows that they were using it against anyone who dissented from their racist pro-war agenda. And so they're using it on American and British and other activists, worldwide, and other Western countries' activists that were involved in war, that were involved in anti-war protests and racial civil rights protests. And so that's why Paul Robeson was a victim, because he was a great civil rights leader before he was the target of MK Ultra. Sadly enough, brilliant lawyer and incredible singer, and and all that. Could speak 20 different languages. Showed that more in my last film. In this film, I show how they funded this Timothy Leary. He got kicked out of Harvard, and he brought his other professors working with him over to this mansion, the Millbrook Mansion, where Peggy and Billy Mellon Hitchcock the Mellon Hitchcock's owned Gulf Oil and Mellon Bank, etc. They were some of the wealthiest in the world, family in the world, who had major agents in U.S. intelligence, working for the CIA and OSS before that. And so they give their mansion to Leary for pennies. He lures great artists and writers and other and political activists up from New York to this constant party. Meanwhile, there's MKUltra scientists just stationed there, experimenting on the people that came to these parties with all kinds of super psychedelics and different things like that. And it tried to lure a number of civil rights activists up to those parties. They did the same thing, and according to the top psychologist from MKUltra, John Gittinger, in a legal testimony, he said he was present at the same kind of parties that were happening in Stanford on the West Coast. And they had this group. They formed this group, the Merry Pranksters, who were many of them were military officers. Came out and had constant parties there. The Grateful Dead were performing for parties they called acid tests. Some people knew they were taking acid when they had a cup of punch, like they call it electric Kool-Aid, and others didn't. Though many that attended their parties didn't know they were being dosed. And those acid tests got larger and larger. They became the be-ins, and that were kind of made popularized by these fake underground newspapers around the country that I call as part of an AstroTurf campaign. That's a public relations term for fake grassroots. And so the parties got bigger to be the Trips Festival, and then to be some of the biggest concerts. And so these undercover agents, CIA agents, were present at these concerts all over the country, pushing acid, pushing speed, pushing all kinds of drugs, experimenting with these drugs on the people that didn't know what they were taking. Timothy Leary was on stage at these be-ins, pushing the drugs to people, pretending like it's mind expanding. They had cooperating journalists that used that wrote books that the CIA basically put out, but because the CIA also owns a lot of publishing companies, and we get these books out, about supposed mind expansion from acid. And really, what the best studies found were that they were, however you felt about mind expansion at the moment you were tripping, you were really hurting your mind in a big way. And I showed 4 articles saying that there's some kind of cerebral damage going on from the acid. And I say this after tripping about half a dozen times myself. And sadly, at the time, I was the first year of college. It kind of spread from last year of high school to first year of college, and just saw my grades drop drastically after tripping. College seemed so easy to me before tripping, and after tripping, I saw my grades drop drastically. Everything got harder.
Well, you know what Leary says is turn on, tune in, and drop out. So
Right,
you
right.
almost
And he
got you
spread,
there.
yeah, he spreads it, and it's like drop out of society, but also drop out of activism.
Yeah.
It's just turn. Him and other agents of the CIA would just say, turn your back on it all, as if it would just go away, as if it will magically go away, the war, versus protesting the war and trying to stop it. And
Yep.
so, meanwhile, there's great activists that are rising up that had nothing to do with drugs at the time, and that was the Students for Democratic Society and the Black Panthers. Those are 2 great activist organizations that are rising up for civil rights and anti-war activism, and they were doing great work, but so they got infiltrated in a major way. And even the New York Times admitted that the FBI and CIA boasted of having an agent in every chapter in the country. And so I show that in my film. But Black Panthers were heavily infiltrated also, though they could try to continue to do great work despite the infiltration, and so did SDS. But by the time I show the evidence that by the time 1969 came around with the national conference in SDS, you had basically a guy whose SDS group had been completely infiltrated and controlled, and his father was one of the wealthiest men in America, and that would be just skipped on his name all of a sudden, but the Bill Ayers, whose father Tom Ayers owned Chicago Tribune. He owned Sears. He was board of directors for General Dynamics, one of the top defense contractors in the country. And Tribune's huge. He also was on the board of the Gas and Electric for Chicago and most of Illinois. And so he was incredibly wealthy. And here is his son coming in and being the leader of Michigan SDS, where SDS started. It started at the University of Michigan. His son becomes the leader of Michigan SDS and doesn't do any civil rights activism. His only civil rights activism is supposedly creating a school that was both black and white, but the both black and white parents of the kids that went to that school withdrew their kids because they said this guy's making our kids racist, and something's going wrong at the school, and opposed any grants going to the school because it was a bizarre situation there. And so he takes over SDS. He the Pulitzer Prize winning article about um, a woman who was part of SDS at that time, Diana Alton, said that this Bill Ayers and this other guy, who they say most people suspected was a CIA undercover agent, who they didn't know where he came from and what he was doing at Michigan. They said that those two, brutalized anyone who opposed anything they wanted to say or do in that SDS. Had dozens of thugs inside SDS beating people who opposed them, and created a really scary atmosphere in SDS. And they took that to the national SDS, and they influenced. I show the evidence they influenced Bernadine Dorn to start tripping often, and her best judgment. Bernadine Dorn was a law student in Chicago at the University of Chicago, or I believe it was Northwestern actually, who had become the leader, one of the top three leaders of SDS. And so he influenced her to at the national convention to break up to just leave the convention with a lot of others, just led them out of the convention, and officially, and in effect broke up SDS. And
Mm-hmm.
FBI, just boasted of their success, the fact that SDS was broken up at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so and then he ends up becoming the new leader of the split SDS. And so it's just a real travesty of what the CIA was able to do to this organization that went from a handful of organizers in 1960 to 100,000 members in 1969. And then these infiltrators, end up just doing away with it. And so it's these are some of the stories that need to be told, and the way drugs were used to hurt the best and brightest minds of our generation that were doing this great anti-war organizing. And they were doing life or death organizing. Obviously, it was around the time of the Vietnam War, when the draft was going on, and young college students were being drafted left and right, and dying in the Vietnam War. Not to mention the million or so that were dying on the Vietnamese side of things. And so these are just examples of what went on in history that best evidence shows are still going on today, because these operations, the counterintelligence program and MKUltra, still go on today. Best evidence shows, and whistleblowers say they're just hidden under different names. Whistleblower Phil Agee said that MKUltra continues just under different names, and former
Mm-hmm.
MKUltra agent Wes Swearingen came out with a memoir in the mid '90s saying, it continues. COINTELPRO continues today, according to his fellow agents, but they just use different names for it. And that's why I focused on the Shakur family, because the fact that when Tupac Shakur went from being a 17-year-old leader of a group called the New African Panthers in 1989 and 90, to being, this rap icon and acting icon. The best evidence is that they, of course, with COINTELPRO still going, they would target him and murderously targeted him. And I show the evidence of how they tried to kill him about 4 or 5 times before they were successful, and to show the evidence of police involvement in those attempted murders, and how the FBI were watching when he was finally done away with, when he was finally murdered, and failed to stop it, according to award-winning Las Vegas reporter Kathy Scott. So this is the way they did things, and they used that modus operandi against John Lennon, because John Lennon becomes so activist. He was dosed the first time they, introduced acid to him. They put it in his coffee without his knowledge. A dentist, actually, George Harrison's dentist. And then, just like they did with Bernardine Dorn to get Bill Ayers, close to her and getting her tripping, and then marrying her, sadly enough. They did the same with Yoko Ono and John Lennon, I argue, because a memoir came out in 2019, like just after my film came out. A memoir came out of a journalist who was friends with John Lennon and Yoko Ono, who said that Yoko introduced him to heroin and had originally got him tripping again when he thought he was losing his mind on acid, and stopped for a year and a half. Actually, about 2 years, he said, from 1967 to 69. And so this is the way they do things. And at the end of his life, he was getting more activist. He was getting away from any hard drugs, and they used apparently a kind of mind controlled Mark David Chapman to shoot at him, and either he killed him or the undercover CIA agent Juan Sanjanis Perdomo, who was the working at John Lennon's apartment house that night, murdered John Lennon in 1980. And so these are some of the stories that just need to be told. Sure.
It's so crazy how deep the rabbit hole goes and in so many different directions, all these wormholes, like the Grateful Dead people. Bob Weir of the Grateful Dead is a frequent Bohemian Grove attendee, and
Yeah.
he's been in interviews talking about how he sits down with the head of the CIA and they have like a great chat and they're
Great.
buddies. And and then so you mentioned the Grateful Dead tours
Yeah.
where people, I mean, there's a whole subculture of people who spend their entire life following the Grateful Dead on their tour and taking acid or
Yeah.
mushrooms or whatever every night.
Yeah.
And this is like another form of, I swear to God, it's some sort of MKUltra
Right.
experiment that these
No
people are
doubt.
being observed. And that brings me to, what are your thoughts on Burning Man? Because I've been thinking about this regarding Burning
Yeah.
Man for
Yeah.
years now. It's so suspicious and
Yeah.
twisted. I don't know. What are your thoughts on Burning Man?
Yeah, so I have a section of my book on Burning Man, and so it's just there's they're dosing. I mean, there's people going around. I have an interview in my that I quote in my book of someone just saying that people were going around with water bottles that they spraying people with, and you think they're just cooling you off with that water bottle, but they're actually there's actually loads of hits of psychedelics in there, and so they're involuntarily making you trip, because acid can be just absorbed through the skin to have you
Hmm.
trip like that, and so that's really ugly stuff. That's the same thing that the CIA's assistant director Robert Lashbrook was doing back in the 60s. He went to England with loads of acid and loads of money and agents, and just instructed the agents to get acid in as many musicians' hands as possible. And that's when John Lennon, right a few months later, John Lennon was involuntarily dosed by George Harrison's dentist then. But so at Burning Man, that's what they were doing. They're getting people tripping against their will. And so yeah, there's lots of evidence in my mind, and I write about in my book about, it's just this fake grassroots situation again, where there's people promoting it all over the world, this Burning Man, and promoting psychedelics like crazy, and trying to divert the youth movement to that, as if that's some kind of revolution of itself. It's just just to burn out your brain on acid and other psychedelics at this thing where it's nice if you like the party, and that's fine. And that's no problem with that. It's just hurting our minds at a time when the oligarchs can just so much easier, roll over us while we're burning our brains out. And we
Hmm.
just have to have our best wits about us to to oppose the oligarchs, because they've got the money, we've got the numbers, but we also have to have the creativity to stop them. Yeah,
Yeah, and I mean and I also have done my share of psychedelics probably. I mean, even the most obscure ones I've managed to get my hands on and do. And I mean,
I have no problem with ayahuasca or, I don't know as much. I mean, I've tried
peyote.
shrooms. I don't know, I don't know how bad shrooms are for you or not, but I do think that when it comes to MDMA, it's clear cut that it's so many studies have found that even just a little bit of MDMA use can hurt our memory in a big way.
I think it fried my brain. I think MDMA totally fried my brain.
Yeah,
And
it's
but
just bad news. Yeah, I mean,
oh
I
my
only tried it
god.
twice, but I definitely found major memory problems after the acid, and then the MDMA I
Mhm.
know didn't help either.
Mhm.
And so, I lost just some skills. I used to be able to write a whole page of a paper in my head easily, just see every word, for a whole page, and then I just pick up the pen and write it out in the old days before computers were as big for writing papers. But I just think that, yeah, these, all these synthetic drugs like MDMA, acid, DMZ, DMT and BZ and all these
Mhm.
things are really dangerous stuff.
Mhm.
Ayahuasca might be more okay. I don't know enough about it, but shrooms, I can't say a whole lot about it. Just the concern is that young people will, they'll try the shrooms and they'll think, well, I want to try something more. I'll open the door to taking acid and messing up their head,
Yeah.
and so it's just a shame. But yeah, it's we got we just got to do things in a more sober way, just to do the best work we can, to stop
Yeah.
what's going on.
Well, it's the perfect tool to ward off of materialism and like actual concrete analysis of reality and like a concrete way of fighting back against our overlords. And the
Yeah,
whole subculture revolves around personal self-improvement and turning in on oneself and focusing on yourself instead of like focusing on the people around you. So it's the perfect anti-communist tool, weapon, in my opinion.
yeah,
And I have been personally victimized by these drugs.
mm,
And I mean, it's just crazy with Burning Man, for example. They pride themselves on personal self responsibility. That's the whole thing. You have to bring all of your own supplies. Nothing's supposed to really be like shared in it. You're supposed to bring everything for yourself. And then you go to Black Rock City. The place where they bring you to is called Black Rock City, like Black Rock. I mean,
it
that's a
sounds
little
like,
odd.
yeah,
And
it's
then most people are unaware that it's now a corporation, Burning Man Corporation, and they're making like a ton of money off these
imagine.
people. And another Burning Man secret is that they don't publish. It's never made public the amount of deaths that happen at Burning Man because if somebody overdoses or if they fall off of a art car and die, what's done is they put you in an ambulance and take you to the nearest town in Nevada and declare you deceased at that hospital in a nearby town. So we'll never have the actual numbers of the amount of deaths that happen at Burning Man. But I am absolutely certain that there's some federal agency doing experiments on people there. I swear to God, it's like the
Believe it.
prime site to do that.
I mean,
Right. And then, so,
yeah,
okay, another thing that I've been thinking about for years that you mentioned in this documentary, and when I saw it, I was like, oh, finally, somebody is bringing this up, is maps. Okay, so
yeah.
there are multiple, uh, it's not minor attracted persons maps. It's, what is it called? Multidisciplinary.
It's the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, and there's
Right.
multiple links between Rick Doblin and MAPS and the Human Ecology Fund of the 1960s and 70s. Where basically the 60s had the Human Ecology Fund, and loads of people that were involved in that, along with the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, which was the group that the Mellon Hitchcocks and Timothy Leary created. Um, some of the same scientists then helped out with maps.
What is
And
maps? Can you tell our listeners who don't
so,
know
so
what
MAPS
this
is,
is?
again, Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. is funded by the Rockefellers, the billionaire Rockefeller family, and other billionaire families, and they supply endless amounts of money to universities all over the world to to basically to promote use of psychedelics for therapy and all kinds of other things. They say it's good for our, in some way good for our
Mhm.
health. They say they
And
pretend.
drug legalization, they're involved in like pushing for drug
They push
legalization.
for LSD legalization and use for therapy again, and shrooms, psychedelic
Therapy.
mushrooms, yeah, MDMA, ecstasy or Molly is MDMA, for the
Ketamine.
ketamine. And we just saw that guy from that actor from Friends die, Matthew Perry, die after
Yeah.
ecstasy use, developing an ecstasy problem. And I mean, yeah, and
And
he died.
ketamine
He
too.
died. He died. I mean, I'm sorry, from ketamine use. He died while he was on ketamine therapy with a MAPS funded, experiment, a group of some sort, or some kind of group that was doing supposed ketamine therapy. He died
Oh God.
in the middle of that, and so this is just some of what's going on there. And so they're funding all these experiments with this stuff, and places like Columbia University, where I went to grad school, and just show that these people are promoting this as if it's about to be legalized, and it hasn't. The FDA actually, despite the massive money and that are going to trying to legalize it, and they found it just shouldn't be legalized because it causes, for all kinds of reasons, causing brain damage, but also the experimenters having sex with experimental subjects and different
Hmm.
things like that. They just said about in the advisory panel turning it down. And personally, I don't care if drugs are legal or illegal. I care about them promoting, the CIA pushing on everyone and acting like it's therapeutic and lying to
Dude,
people about it
get
all.
this. Sorry to interrupt you, but
It's okay.
I got an ad on Instagram last year, and it
Hmm.
was literally an ad for at home, like virtual ketamine therapy for your PTSD or whatever. That was a targeted ad towards me on Instagram. So
Wow.
now they're mail. I don't know how it works, but I'm assuming they're mailing people the
Mhm.
ketamine so that they can sit on a webcam with a therapist and do this ketamine therapy over the computer, like essentially unsupervised. Like no,
Yeah.
there's no medical assistance if you need it at your house.
Right. Right.
Like I couldn't believe my eyes when
Yeah.
that was marketed to me. So they're like that's the level that they're pushing this now.
Yeah.
Is it's on
Yeah.
Instagram ads.
Yeah. It's ridiculous. And so they're joined by MAPS is joined by another group called Hefter, which is the same mission, same donors like the Rockefellers and others, and the Pritzker family and people like that. And a third group is a British group called the Beckley Foundation, which was founded by a member of the royalty, Amanda Fielding, who was pushing, I said in my film, trepanning, which is drilling a hole in your skull to expand your mind. And it should be, you think it'd be a Saturday Night Live skit or something, but they're pushing it as normal. And sadly enough, they almost convinced John Lennon to trepan himself to drill a hole in his skull, but he, thankfully, thought better. But his taking acid again with Yoko Ono made him think that maybe he should try it. So he was, hurting his mind at that time. But this Amanda Fielding's still around today, and her Beckley Foundation has joint conferences with MAPS and Hefter, and they're the ones pushing the psychedelics all over the world right now. And it's sad. It's a sad fact that these Ivy League schools, all these schools, just need the money, and they're being offered this huge amount of money to just do these experiments, and schools have a hard time turning down money. So sad but true.
It's crazy that they took MK Ultra, told us that we stopped doing that actually, you guys, but then they just continued it under like a woke NGO, like hyper liberal cloak of these organizations such as MAPS. So MAPS will like push like, oh look, we have trans people working for us. We have indigenous people working for us. We're
Yeah,
so great and open minded, and you should take
right.
these drugs. it's just, I mean, I'm very impressed by how they're just continuing on under a completely new cloak, and people are, I mean, I used to think maps was good before I knew like the true history of all this.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you've seen their ugly background, and yeah, so it's incredible how they just have these think tanks that are getting paid to come up with all kinds of angles to convince us of these things. And so we have to just really be independent minded thinkers and sort through all this propaganda they come up with to push it on us and try to figure out what's best for us. But keeping a clear mind and a sane mind is something that's not easy to do when we're constantly being bombarded with try this drug, try that drug, whether it be the psychedelics or the pharmaceutical, company's newest thing for, relieving you of depression or anxiety or whatever else. While, things, new techniques like eye movement desensitization and reprocessing is just a completely non-invasive way of we call it neutralizing, processing and neutralizing traumas in your life. And these can be, sexual or physical abuse kind of traumas, or they could be just even emotional traumas. And I've come to find, and many therapists have come to find, psychiatrists that are alternative psychiatrists have come to find that these emotional traumas and other kinds of traumas is what tends to cause these, depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues that psychiatrists pushing drugs try to say is genetic and trying to get you to use their latest pharmaceutical for.
Hmm. Well, well, I always grew up hearing that it's a chemical imbalance in the brain and you have to
That's
fix
their
the
favorite
chemical imbalance.
term.
But
Yeah.
I mean, it was just revealed this past year that there's no such thing as a chemical imbalance in the brain. And that was just something that they made up to sell the drugs. So,
Yeah. I mean, in England where they have national health care, they've looked at the meta studies for these antidepressants, and they basically found that in the long term, they don't work better than a placebo. And they obviously work a lot worse because they have all kinds of side effects, from major weight gain to Lexapro causing major sexual dysfunction to
yeah,
all kinds of things.
permanent sexual dysfunction and suicide.
Mm. Yeah, there's all kinds of horrible side effects like that. So, and you can see it in their their pharmaceutical ads on TV here. They just list loads of these side effects that are just so ugly and scary. And people, I don't know how people take these drugs after hearing these side effects, but the advertisements I hear actually aren't even to sell the drugs. They sell the drugs no matter what, but the advertisements are to control TV and control TV stations and control their content.
Yeah, and it's also interesting because I haven't really owned my own TV in many years, and I remember a couple years ago visiting my parents' house during the holidays, and they have the TV on, and I was shocked that almost every single commercial that I saw was for a pharmaceutical drug, and I did not remember it being that way, 10
Yeah,
years ago. But now, I mean, every other commercial is for
yeah,
drugs, and it just struck me like, wow, that's a sign of the times. I think that
yeah,
things have changed to that degree. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, no doubt. And so that's why RFK Jr. is on this crusade to get them off of TV, because United States and New Zealand are the only Western countries in the world that allow pharmaceutical companies to advertise on TV.
Wow.
And so, he, and it's, I know people might be upset, of course, with him be getting to be part of Trump's campaign, but RFK Jr. did everything to try to run as a Democrat, then tell the Democrats, look, then run as an independent. But the Democrats sued him in every state around the country that they could, and then he offered, just said, look, I'll back you to Kamala Harris if you just allow me to head Health and Human Services or be part of your cabinet. She completely refused him, and Trump said, okay, I'll let you be head of human, health and human services, if you back me. And he just wanted to get in there to try to change things, to try to take all these toxins out of our food, that are, he just shows that, and just change things for the better. And he's very interesting for the fact that he's been studying the CIA all his life. And because his grandfather actually had pushed hard against the CIA in a big way in around 1955 or so, and they attacked his grandfather. Then they, of course, killed his uncle and his father,
Hmm.
and of course, they're now trying to smear him too. But he's brilliant about MKUltra. He's brilliant about the CIA's history and about
Yeah.
all their nefarious activities. And so we'll see. I mean, they probably won't let him, be in health and human services, but at least he's getting the word out about all these, the danger of all these
Yeah.
pharmaceuticals and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. We'll see what he's able to do because I mean, he's up against the biggest industries in the world
Right,
and trillions of dollars against him,
right,
against
right,
our interests. So we'll
right.
see.
Yeah, yeah. So, but so I appreciate you talking to me about all this, Bridges. Good. I think in Mexico, it's very interesting because I heard from doctors in Mexico that during the pandemic, they actually had hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin in all the airports, just in,
Yeah.
on the shelves for the public to gain access to whenever they wanted,
Yeah. It's
to
at the
counter.
pharmacy.
Yeah, it was really wild how Mexico did things completely differently. And
Hmm.
many countries did that. We're in our little bubble here in the United States and just don't, where the media just vilify anything that's not the very expensive vaccines, the very expensive other kinds of drugs. But
Yeah, it's really crazy how expensive things are in the United States, and
yeah,
I appreciate RFK Jr. I I mean, I do think he's compromised with the whole Zionism thing. That's a
hmm,
shame. That's really unfortunate. I wonder, and also the Epstein, like him being on Epstein's plane 3 times. That's
yeah,
unfortunate, but
yeah,
I think that he is at least enlightening people to the truth of how these industries work. And I've come
mhm,
across just people that I meet, especially older people,
mhm,
like especially older people, they really really like him, and they I feel like he has unveiled a lot of truths for a lot of people, and he has a lot of popular support on both sides, like Democrats and Republicans.
mhm.
So I mean, the other one more thing.
Sure, sure.
Do you have any thoughts? It's kind of related. Do you have any thoughts about the recent shooting of the United Healthcare CEO? Do you think that because people are claiming, some people are speculating that Luigi Mangione is MK Ultra? What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I just think that he did herald Ted Kaczynski in some kind of notes of his or something, but and in doing that, he was promoting a guy who was an MK Ultra victim, Ted Kaczynski at Harvard. Kaczynski apparently was they tortured him with uh, psychologically while they gave him psychedelics at Harvard, and that's why he was so intensely against the United States government because of horrible things they did to him. But with Mangione, I don't think he's an MK Ultra subject. I think apparently some sources, they're not good sources. I haven't studied it carefully, but I hear that he was sending out psychedelic mushrooms to people. Also, I don't know if that's true or not, but if so, there's a good chance he did a lot of psychedelics, and maybe he just acted a little rashly about
Mm-hmm.
what were rightful concerns. That he hates national health care. He hates the healthcare system in the United States and hates these guy making head of a CEO of a health plan making $10 million when they're denying services for people all over the country that are going into poverty in order to try to pay for a procedure, a life-saving procedure. And so he was just to me, he was just acting more rash, just more impetuously about in the way he countered that, and shooting the head of an insurance company. But it's he's become a folk hero, and I think for pretty good reason. I mean, I don't agree with murder, but I do think that he at least brought the issue to light in a bigger way for everyone, and said this is our system's out, it's just totally out of control, and
Mhm.
is so inhumane to people, and we're the only industrialized country in the world that doesn't have national health care, and it's absolutely inhumane. So
Yeah. Yeah, maybe you're right. I mean, I saw that his Goodreads account, it's public, and you could see all of his reviews of the books that he's read because he's an avid reader, and he was reviewing a lot of books about psychedelics particularly. So I wonder if that did play a role in his kind of spiral. If he actually was the shooter, it's all alleged, but
yeah, and they
it could
say
play a part.
there's usually in these kinds of situations there is a group of people working with a guy. They always claim it's a solo shooter and all, but best intelligence agent that actually partnered with Naomi Wolf, who is an interesting writer. She wrote some letters, some really interesting anti U.S. fascist books. Um, he basically said that when you have a situation like this where you shoot someone like this, to come upon them at the exact time you want to, you need like a team of people surveying the situation. You can't just do it alone. It's incredibly hard to do something like that alone. Now, I'm not saying I totally trust this intelligence agent who wrote this, but it makes sense. I mean, why would he like, write this in a way that what's his motive otherwise? But so there's probably people helping Mangione, and I don't know why. I don't know what it was all about, but it's interesting. I don't know enough more about the story
Yeah.
than that, but it's an interesting new development, and I just hope that something good comes of the fact that people are talking about how horrible these insurance companies can be
Yep.
for healthcare in the U.S.
Yeah. Oh, and I almost forgot the another drug reference for him is that on his Twitter header, the image that he chose to upload for his Twitter header, it was a picture of a Pokemon, and then the picture of his spinal X-ray with the metal bolts put in his spine, and
Mm-hmm.
then a picture of him like at his physical prime. But the first image of the Pokemon is specifically the mushroom Pokemon. So I'm
Yeah,
like, okay, he was into mushroom, like he's into psychedelics. Like the guy's
yeah,
into
yeah,
psychedelics.
no
The
doubt.
signs are there, but I really do wonder if people were helping him. It also seems like he wanted to get caught because I mean, the whole thing. I'm surprised he got away at all, but then it
Mm,
seems like he wanted to get caught and was leaving like a trail and going into
yeah,
public. And I'm curious to see what will happen with this
yeah,
case and what
yeah,
information will even be disclosed to us. But
yeah.
we'll see. Do you want to wrap up now, or do you have time for one more question? What do you think?
Time for another question, sure.
Okay, going back to the SDS. In your documentary, you talk about the Weather Underground and their involvement in various sabotage operations of leftist movements. Can you just talk a little bit about the Weather Underground? Because when I used to be a drugged out anarchist, I thought the Weather Underground was so cool, and I wanted to be just like them, not realizing the true history of how they were created and what their purpose was. So,
Well,
you want to just talk a little bit about that?
to me, they're a mixed bag. I think overall, though, that a lot of people involved in the Weather Underground that had sincere intentions did very courageous work at fighting the fascists of the warmongers and the the anti civil rights people and all that. Like the Weather Underground was just one grouping of many different groups from my readings of it all that were conducting these bombings again to protest the Vietnam War and to protest the unfair incarceration of leading Black Panthers. I mean, they, certain. It's not known if it was the Weather Underground or if it was some other, revolutionary faction that bombed the judge's home at least once, if not twice, of when they were put Tupac's mother and the New York City Black Panthers on trial. And so there's just bombings all over for so many different reasons that but the Weather Underground was just one formation that was doing this. And even though they were infiltrated and even though they were split off from SDS, I do think, and they weren't, maybe the most clear minded what they were doing. I do think they were sobering up. They put out some books telling why they were doing what they were doing. I have one of the books, Prairie Fires, not the best book, but I think it's got some good essays on this kind of work they were doing. And I think they did help. I mean, they tried every other tactic to stop the Vietnam War and to protest for civil rights that they could. And then finally, they, when nothing else worked, they did go to bombings, but they weren't the first to go to the bombings. Other groups did it before them, and they just merely took off from there from what other groups had already started. And so there was a group, for example, led by a woman that went to my undergrad, Swarthmore College, that also was involved in bombings before the Weather Underground even started it. So so I just think it was just a tactic, and I think they did some good stuff. There were a lot of cells all around the country doing this, so not every cell could be, was infiltrated. I think it was just some well-meaning folks that had enough of having so many Americans and Vietnamese people killed for no reason for the oligarchs. And so that's my take on it. Even though I say that the splitting up of SDS was terrible, the Weather Underground, it was, as I say, it was probably a mixed bag. But overall, I do think they were courageous and did some good work despite some of the bad stuff that happened with these. I mean, there's reports of their orgies weren't all voluntary necessarily, and so some people might have been traumatized from some of the supposed free love and stuff. But generally speaking, I think it was like a majority of the people in the group were more well-meaning.
Yeah, I think, well, I'm sure some of the people were well-meaning. I have a different outlook to groups like the Weather Underground and
Yeah,
their like the federal infiltration
yeah,
and being egged on by the feds to commit these bombings. I view them similarly in their adventurism to Luigi Mangione, where you do these extreme acts of violence, but what does it really get you? Like, does it actually get us anywhere to do things like that in that circumstance where you don't have mass popular support or a mass party or any long-term plan of how you're gonna
hmm
you don't have anybody on your side except your little clique. And there's a really good interview of Fred Hampton of the Black Panthers talking about his
yeah. My
opposition to the
film,
Weather
yeah,
Underground, and he's like, they're committing folly, they're irresponsible, and
yeah.
they're
They're
distracting from the
muddleheads.
work that we're trying to get
Yeah,
done.
yeah, in that
And
time, in my film, I have that Fred Hampton. They're saying they're
yeah,
muddleheads and scatterbrains for sure. At that time, they were at their worst. They were the most scatterbrained and muddlehead because they were tripping up a storm, and that's what really hurt their best, their presentation in the beginning and their planning in the beginning with this, Chicago, raid. Like they were going to just fight the police in Chicago, and it
it
was
makes the
ridiculous.
left look nuts. It makes
It
everybody
does.
turn against
Oh,
us.
it totally does. And at that time, they were at their worst, and they were a big turnoff, and their promotion of acid was totally federally manipulated, and Bill Ayers
Yeah.
type of person manipulated, and it hurt a lot of brains around the country when they did that, promoted acid to like loads of activists, and that's horrible. But later, when they sobered up more, I do think they did better work than that. But again, it's just an argument. It's a healthy debate about tactics, And I think this was some of their last tactic, and I don't think they were completely federally manipulated. I think it was just partially federally manipulated to split up SDS, and that was terrible. But then all the people that got involved were, I tend to think, I think a majority, not all, of course, because some were federal agents, undercover agents, but a majority, I think, were well-meaning and just picked the most violent tactic after all the other tactics
Yeah.
didn't work anymore.
Yeah. It's crazy how the Black Panthers were fighting everybody off. I mean, everyone was coming at them. Even Timothy Leary was going after the Black Panthers, trying to get them to take acid, and he was getting
Right.
kicked. He got kicked out of their headquarters, and they were like, "What the
Right.
fuck are you doing, dude? Like,
Yeah.
why are you trying to get us on these drugs? We don't want this. What the hell are
Yeah.
you doing?" And then later it came out
Yeah.
why he was doing that. But they had
Yeah.
everybody coming after
I
him.
definitely detailed that in my first film, and then detailed that also in my book.
Yeah.
How Timothy Leary tried to do that, tried to push it on Eldridge Cleaver and the Black Panthers in exile.
Yep.
And yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
ugly. Yeah,
So crazy. Oh my
yeah.
God.
So
Okay, well, I highly recommend everybody to watch this new documentary as well as your other documentaries and read your books. Do you want
thanks.
to go ahead and tell our listeners how they can find you, how they can find your work, and
Sure. Yeah, thanks. It's you
yeah,
can find, all my work and all the links to my work at johnpotash.com, but the film is for free on Tubi right now, and it's got 18 plus bonus scene minutes as a DVD that you can buy on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, or even, actually, believe it or not, Target selling it. And so I there's a number of platforms, digital platforms it's on now, though. And if you want to see it without ads for $1.99 on Google Play and YouTube Movie Rentals, you can see it there. But it free on Tubi is still supports me in terms of, giving me just a little bit of ad revenue from that. But it's if you want to buy it directly from me, also I have the DVDs too. I have a distributor, but I get a certain amount that I can send to people too. And so I hope people look it up and see all the evidence. The book's got both my books have over 1,000 endnotes, and the DVD has most of those, a good amount of those sources saying what we're talking about in this film. I mean, in this interview.
that's awesome. Yeah, I'm going to link all of that below so people can easily find it and find you if they want to get an actual physical copy mailed to them. And I highly recommend everybody to dive into John's work because there's so much to learn. It's like it's almost endless, and it helps you make sense of our culture and history and why things are the way that they are, and could even help you make sense of your own personal experiences and your own personal relationship with the left or with drugs. I mean, there's a lot to learn culturally and personally. So thank you so much for coming back, John, and you're welcome anytime, as
Thanks.
usual.
Thanks so much,
You're the
Bridget.
best. All right.
Great.
I'll catch
Great
you next
talking to you.
time.